Hello, everybody. The views and opinions expressed on this show may not necessarily be those of Acts Ministry, Acts Media Group, or any of their subordinate and affiliate ministries. Also, some of the content of this show may not be suitable for children, so please use discretion while watching with them. Thank you.
All right. Hello, everybody. Paul Collins here. We're coming on the air, as so to speak, a little early. And Nancy's motioning, saying that her earphones are too loud. It's just because of my resonant voice. Anyway, taking this opportunity, coming on a little early to say hello to special friends. Our special friends in St. Joe. We added to them the other day with the addition of Sally Pike. And Sally was a little teeny bopper when I was her pastor in St. Joe many years ago. Now she's a retired lady.
Does that make you Methuselah?
Just about. And the other St. Josephite that is a regular viewer is Shirley Simpson, my first secretary in St. Joe. First one I had any place. And then, of course, Jerry Chambers. He was an old St. Joe boy, and he's a retired school administrator now, living in Chesterfield, Missouri. Jerry was a teenager in the church when I was there. I helped him with his God and Country Award. And then we have friends in, of course, other friends in St. Joe as well. And then we have friends in Lubbock, Texas, up in the Panhandle. And we really are glad to have them on board, the Gages and the Elvers and their church and
the Ways.
And the Ways, and Lyle Way is the greatest Christian novelist I ever read, and he's a wonderful friend, great writer, great storyteller. And then in South Central Texas, Lynette Parks and some others, Curtis and his wife, and their son and his wife, and then a little deeper, and then of course also South Central Texas, really. Northeast Texas almost, Galen Garrett, and then on further south in the College Station area is Judy Nickel. And up in northeast Missouri, we have some friends there. One of the new ones is Tom Seaver. He keeps us in touch with folks at Lakeview Church. And then we have friends in Moberly, my hometown. We have friends all over when you get right down to, how about the Underwoods way out there in Arizona? Mm-hmm. Ed and Karen Underwood, great entertainers. Ed's a great magician, sleight of hand guy, great preacher. And Karen's a beautiful singer and a beautiful lady. And Ed also is a great guitarist. He does things with a guitar that are just unbelievable. They are marvelously talented people. And I don't want to overlook anybody, but it is now 10:02, and of course I'm the guy originally that started the thing about the disclaimers for Acts Media Group programming, and so now I'm going to do one in reverse. Paul and Nancy Collins are in no way responsible for anything anybody says connected with Acts Media Group. Make a little joke out of it. Anyway, seriously, Acts Media Group, Acts Ministry, and anyone affiliated with them cannot be held responsible for whatever we do on this show or whatever we say. Now, the topic today is money.
What's that?
Well, what is money? That's a good question these days because we hear about fiat money.
What's fiat money? I think of cars when you say fiat money.
It's not a car, although fiats cost money. This is a dollar bill, United States currency. And it's backed up only by the U.S. government. It's not backed up by any precious metal, and it's called fiat, which means sort of, it's in place of the real thing. So it's not even it means phony, basically. So I want to give a little demonstration that I've done in front of congregations and other places. We have to pretend that we have somebody here with us. Mm-hmm. And so you pretend with us. Remember when you were a little kid, you'd say, let's pretend, and then you would take on, superhero characters. Let's pretend that we have a third person here. and we'll pretend that we're passing this dollar bill around. So I hold up this dollar bill, and Nancy says, Paul, do you remember a couple of weeks ago you borrowed $2 from me? I could sure use my money. I say, well, Nancy, I've got $1. And I'll hand her the dollar, and I say, I owe you $1.
Yeah.
Okay?
Got my
Stay
dollar.
with me. So then over here to my right is Shirley Simpson. And she says, Nancy, you remember a couple of weeks ago you borrowed a couple of dollars from me? I could sure use my money. And Nancy says, well, Shirley, I only have $1. I'll give you one, and I'll owe you one. And Shirley says, okay. And I look at Shirley, and I say, Shirley, you remember a couple of weeks ago you borrowed a couple of bucks from me? I could sure use my money. She says, well, Paul, I only have one. I'll give you one and owe you one. I said, thank you. And then Nancy looks over at me and she says, Paul, remember you still owe me $1. I say, yeah, well, here you are. And so Nancy takes it, and I say, you're paid off. And then Shirley looks at Nancy and says, Nancy, you still owe me $1. And Nancy says, yeah, here you are, Shirley. You're paid off. Shirley says, thank you. I look at Shirley and I say, Shirley, you know you still owe me $1. And she says, here it is. I take the dollar. I say, thank you, I'm paid off. Everybody's paid off with $1. I hope you get that. It works whether it's $1, $5, $10, $100, $1,000, $10 million. That's the way fiat money works, and that's the way credit works up to a certain extent. So let's talk about credit for just a moment. Now, this show about money is being done by two amateurs. We are not professional financial planners. We are not accountants. We are not CPAs. We're not professional investors. We're not professionals when it comes to money or assets and so forth. But let's talk about credit. I remember, now you need to remember, I'm about as old as the hills. So I remember when credit wasn't good. I remember when people didn't want to admit that they were buying something on time payments. Some of you aren't even acquainted with that terminology, but what it meant was they would be paying for something over a period of time. Do not mistake it with layaway. You used to be able to go into department stores and you would pick out something and put it on layaway, and you'd go in every week or whenever and pay a little bit on it until you got it paid off. Then you picked up the merchandise. That was called layaway. The payment on time payments meant that you borrowed, you got something and you couldn't pay for it, but you had possession of it. It wasn't on layaway. You had possession, and you were paying for it over a period of time. Time payments. And people didn't want to really admit that they had to use layaway to buy something, and they didn't want to admit that they had to buy something on time. They just didn't. Once in a while we would see someone and they'd have something new and nice, whatever. We'd say, wonder how they could afford that. And somebody'd say, oh, they got it on time payments. Kind of with a sneer in their voice, like they didn't have the money, so they bought it on time. Well, somewhere along the line, that all changed so that credit became a good word, not a bad word. I think it probably happened during my very formative teen years, to the latter part of my teen years, sometime about the time that I graduated from high school, which would have been in the Eisenhower years. I graduated from high school in 1953. But somewhere along the line, we started being taught that it was important to have good credit. Before that, credit was bad. Now they're saying credit is good, so you must have good credit. It's about the time when prices started to inflate quite a lot. So you had to build your good credit. The only way you could build good credit was by buying things on time payments. And if you were faithful in your payments, then your credit rating went up. All of a sudden we had credit reporting agencies, credit bureaus. So credit became good, whether it was or not. But it was perception. You had to have good credit. Now, right on the heels of that, they came along with this thing called a credit card. Now, the genius was in the name.
Mm-hmm.
I've said this for years. If they'd called it a debt card, it wouldn't have gotten off the ground hardly. But they called it a credit card because now credit is a good word. And so with the advent of credit cards now, as of 3 years ago, there was $1.2 billion in credit card debt in 1950, they reported it. It's gone up since then. Back in 1950, actually 1956, it was $1.2 billion in credit card debt. Of that part, Diners Club, one of the originals, it was just 22 million. So the credit card branding multiplied from MasterCard to MasterCharge to all the others. There's so many of them. Now, anyway, now we wouldn't have. Now we have people who are proud of how many credit cards they carry. They're not proud of how many debt cards they carry. And we have people who amass a tremendous amount of debt on their credit cards because credit is good. As a result, credit card companies are becoming fabulously wealthy. They're making tremendous amounts of money. There are now 20,000 different cards available, 20,000 of them. 90% of the people don't pay off their credit card. You know, they use it and it comes in, pay it like we do. We use it to purchase stuff. Then when the bill comes in once a month, boom, we pay the credit card off, so we don't carry any credit card debt. But 90% of the people don't do as we do. Then this was 3 years ago, so probably 95% now don't pay off their credit card. They only make a minimum payment, whatever the minimum monthly payment is. So that's where we are with this, from the standpoint of credit and debt, and it is not a pretty picture. We need to remember that dollar bill, illustration. Money circulates, it circulates, it circulates, and you have to determine where are you in that circular motion of money. Money in motion, where are you in regard to it? Also, we have to come to grips with something called inflation. Inflated, it's like you take a balloon, and before it has any air in it, you put it to your lips and you blow it up, you inflate it. Money has become inflated. That dollar bill that I passed around is no longer worth $1 from the way it was started. It's now worth like 10 cents.
Well, how much was a dollar when, say, you were 10 or 12?
$1.
It was worth $1.
Right. Now it's worth 10 cents. The house that I grew up in, my dad paid for it on time payments to a family that he bought it from. It was an $850 house. That same house today, probably it would be on the market at, I don't know, maybe $70,000, $80,000.
Mm-hmm.
Big increase. So inflation means everything that you buy, for the most part, costs more, and the value of your money is less.
So that's why you have to pay more?
Sure. You pay more because they increase the prices because the money isn't worth what it used to be.
So who determines how much
Well,
a
now,
dollar is worth?
that's a really good question because we assume a lot in regard to that. We, in America, we've been taught about the free market system, the law of supply and demand, that the amount of supply will determine the price, and the amount of supply will be determined by how much demand you have for the product. In other words, if you have one product,
Like toilet paper.
toilet tissue, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, when there was a demand and the supply was limited, the price went up. So some people say that all this is determined by the free market and the law of supply and demand. However, they are discounting or overlooking the role that government plays in all of this. And we're talking primarily here the federal government, because federal government has a lot to say about interest rates and that sort of thing. So interest rates, we're back to credit again, and interest rates will be one of the factors involving determining an inflationary rate. And if people are spending a lot of money, then the Federal Reserve Bank slows down the supply of money because they don't want to have more of an inflation rate, because the more money people spend, the more inflated things become. So they try to slow it down. If there's looking like there's going to be a recession, that is where people are going to spend less money and make less money, then the Fed will put more money into the system to blow it back up again. So that's why they call it fiat money, and it's really a fiat economy. Now, this is really not my realm of expertise, so if some of you out there watching and listening, you have expertise in this matter, don't hesitate to go to the Axe Media Group website and communicate with me. That'd be the best way. Just go to Axe, A-C-T-S, axemediagroup.com, and through there, send a message to old Dr. Paul and the folks who look after that website. They'll see that I get it, because I'm not an expert about economics, money. I'm talking to you as a lay person. This is not my area of study. I went to college 5 years, not because it took me longer to get out, but because I graduated, then I went back, and then I have 3 years of graduate study, and then I have 2 years of postgraduate study beyond that. I did not study economics or money. That's not what I studied. So this is stuff that I have learned on my own, and I'm sure that it's not 100% accurate, but it's pretty close. My example of that dollar bill passing around, same money used to pay everybody's bill, and the same guy ended up with the dollar, meaning me. That's very real. This much I can tell you, my research from those who know. And who are those who know? Professional economists, statisticians, those who make it their business every day to study money. Here's what they found in 2018, year 2018, that 57% of the Americans of wage earning age, 57% couldn't write a check for $1,000 that would clear the bank. 44% couldn't write a check for $400. Now, folks, I'm here to tell you, to me, a $20 bill still looms large. But the fact is, in today's economy, $1,000 isn't much. You can't buy much with $1,000. $400 is less. There's not much you can buy with $400.
I know, but isn't how each person perceives an amount of money, say $100 or $1,000, isn't that in the mind of the beholder?
Well, yeah, like I say, to me, a $20 bill is still major.
Yeah, me too.
But when we get to the hard reality of today's economy and what it costs to live, $1,000 isn't all that much money. Yeah. Back in 1953, my brother, who was 6 years older than me at the time, bought a brand new Chevrolet. Now, it was a plain Jane, very plain, but a brand new Chevrolet for like $850. Same amount that my dad paid for the house that he and I were reared in. Mm-hmm. But $850 for a brand new car. Now, you're not going to buy a brand new car for $850 today. So think about it. There's there are pickup trucks that cost over $60,000, $70,000 for a truck that will lose value day after day after day. The moment you drive it off the lot, you lose money. It's gone down. So $1,000, 57% in 2018. Now it's probably more like 75% of the people who are adults can't write a check for $1,000. 44% of them, now it's probably more like 70%, can't write a check for $400. And listen, there are people that you and I have seen in checkout lines in grocery stores with their carts piled high, high and deep, as you would say.
Mm-hmm.
And groceries are not cheap. It's it's very very easy for two people to spend more than $400 a month in a grocery store. But when you buy not just groceries, but paper products and cleaning products and so forth, things that are offered in supermarkets these days. So to think probably 70% of today's adults in America can't write a check for $400. So how are they buying things? The credit card. Now, because credit cards, the interest rate was so high, they started catching some heat, we'll call it, from the public. And people in marketing know these things. And the people in marketing said, we need to change a little bit here. We got to tweak this. They started calling it a bank card, even if it wasn't attached to a bank. But a bank card was much more respectable sounding than credit card. So now we have people on television saying, well, you can always give using your bank card. That's a tip-off. When you watch some of these so-called Christian TV shows, and they want your money at the end of it, and in the middle of it and at the end of it, they will say, you can use your bank card just like a check. See, it's all in the terminology. All right. In the middle of this, we had back in 2018, 43% struggling to pay the minimum payment on their credit cards. And that's probably more like 60% now, struggling to pay the minimum, whatever that minimum may be. It may be $60, $70, $80. Remember, high percentage of the people can't write a check for $400. Then, back then, in 2018, 73% of the people died in debt. That's higher now. That's like 90% of the people die in debt. And that may be a conservative figure. I would dare say we have a generation that's now toward the end of their work life. They have accumulated so much debt on credit cards, bank cards, real estate, cars, that it is very possible that only about 5% of the people will die not in debt. Debt seems to be, see, the whole global economy is based on debt. Look how much the United States owes China. Look how much the United States government has in debt right now, like $30 trillion. That's government debt. Then the American...
Then where does the government get their money to pay their debts?
They just print some more, and that means the more they print, the less it's worth. So it's all a huge bubble. And this gets to the point where it's mind-boggling. Please stay with us because I have some interesting things to share with you along this line. 49% in 2018 couldn't cover 1 month of expense if they didn't have a paycheck. Had no money laid back. That's probably more like 60% of the people have no money laid back, as we say. A good many, like 25% back in 2018, 20% of the bankruptcies were college students taking bankruptcy. Still in college, taking bankruptcy. Why? Because the moment they hit the campus, somebody's there saying, here's a credit card, here's a credit card, here's a credit card. Oh, free money. No, there's no free money, no free lunch. Eventually, the chickens come home to roost, and you can't make the monthly payments anymore, the minimums, and they take bankruptcy. That figure now may be higher. Of course, everything has changed because in the last year we've had this pandemic and business has been different, but I don't think it got better. It probably got worse than it was in 2018. Well, anyway, I have another thing to cover about money, recent developments, and then I will provide people with some real hope. I subscribe and go online to, well, it's free, to a website called Ministry Watch. Ministry, M-I-N-I-S-T-R-Y, ministrywatch.com. And they are the ones who report very accurately on churches and parachurch ministries, that is, evangelistic associations like Billy Graham Evangelistic Association or Samaritan's Purse, which is a missionary organization, and other nonprofits. And here's the latest news. As of this morning, the Internal Revenue Service has finalized a tax on nonprofit organizations with $1 million salaries. Now, I've been telling folks, it announcing from the treetops for months that we have a great many of their favorites, church and charity, that have very high-paid executives, many being paid over $1 million a year. Now, some of you may say, well, that's all right if they earned it. Well, is it? I mean, we're talking nonprofit here. We're talking not paying federal tax. And I don't want to get into this and say, well, all nonprofits ought to have to pay tax like a regular corporation. I'm not getting into that. What I'm saying is, don't abuse a privilege that's been given by the people to certain organizations that are designated for the purpose of doing good. And if you want to be employed by a nonprofit, you should go into it not expecting to be a high-paid executive. If you say, well, I have the talents, the training, the education, the gifts, the ability to make lots of money, good. Go to work for a regular corporation. Mm-hmm. Don't think that just because you have all these abilities that you are entitled to work for a nonprofit, which means tax exempt, and receive the same kind of financial remuneration that you would receive if you were in the secular world. The IRS has finalized its rules on an excise tax. Now, look it up, excise tax, E-X-C-I-S-E, to discourage excessive compensation at nonprofit organizations. In its February 16th bulletin, less than a month ago, the IRS announced an update to Section 4960 of the Internal Tax Code, taxing nonprofit organizations and churches that pay covered employees, and they put that in quote marks, covered employees, more than $1 million in wages or provide excessive golden parachute payments. So the reason the IRS is doing this is because there are so many who are covered employees of nonprofits, parachurch ministries, and churches that have $1 million in wages and other excessive golden parachute payments. The bulletin explains that a covered employee is one of the 5 highest compensated employees of the organization. By the way, I also get all this stuff from the IRS direct. I get their bulletins. I get about 3 or 4 a day. I get 3 or 4 a day from the Social Security Administration. I get government bulletins daily, online, of course, from the Federal Drug Administration, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, many government agencies. The one that I look at very closely is the IRS, obviously, and Social Security. When covered employees, who are often executives, receive more than $1 million in wages or excessive parachute payments, the nonprofit must file a Form 4720 Schedule N, that is Form 4720 Schedule N, as in Nancy. Then the nonprofit organization must pay a 21% tax on the excessive compensation. 21% tax. Friends, God only charges 10%. Just let that hang out in your head for a while. However, God does charge interest. And if you check the Old Testament, the interest rate was 25%. So, the Bible does speak to today. And we're either going to go as the Bible speaks, or we're going to go as man's rules and regulations speak. I want to explain to you quickly. We have basic law. The Ten Commandments, that's as basic as you can get. Then there are extrapolations of the law that begins to be applied through rule and regulation. And I said last week on this broadcast the difference between rule and regulation and law by adjudication as compared to law by legislation when I was doing that book for our Missouri government on public employee collective bargaining. Anyway, we now live under a system of rules and regulations, which means that every day, every citizen in the United States who's an adult, or even younger than adult, if you're able to walk and talk and, be in school, you break some kind of federal rule and regulation every day because there's so many of them. Well, the rules and regulations require now nonprofits and churches to pay a 21% excise tax on certain employees. Then there's an organization called Trinity Foundation. And the Trinity Foundation, they're sort of a watchdog group, and they took a look at certain highly paid, compensated ministry leaders and determined that the Inspirational Network, and I can say this out loud, I don't have to hint at it because it's here in print. You can find it with Ministry Watch, you can find it with Trinity Foundation, you can find it, it's nothing that's secret. Determined that Inspirational Network, High Point University, and Educational Media Foundation, which is known as K-Love, they pay the excise tax. Why? Because they have covered employees who are compensated in excess of $1 million a year. Then even the Wall Street Journal reports on the man who was the chancellor of Liberty University, huge university, fast growing in Virginia. It is a university that was founded by a minister who was educated here in Springburg, USA, Springfield, Missouri. He was a graduate of one of the Bible colleges here in 1955, and he started Liberty University, and it's a huge university. He's now deceased. His son, who's trained as a lawyer, was the chancellor for a good many years, and he just had to resign over some accusations involving moral turpitude, which, by the way, they insist that all funeral directors and morticians have good moral turpitude. I think university chancellors should too, as should governors of New York, etc. Enough said about that. Anyway, according to the Wall Street Journal, he reported that he could receive $10.5 million in parachute payments. And the Wall Street Journal said that he was due his $1.25 million salary, that's $1.25 million salary, for 2 years after resigning, followed by a lump sum payment of about $8 million. So after resigning, he gets paid his regular salary of $1.25 million for 2 years. After that, they buy out his contract to the tune of $8 million because of a clause in his contract that allowed him to resign with full pay if his responsibilities were curtailed. Anyway, Liberty University, according to Trinity Foundation, estimates that Liberty University will pay a tax penalty. Now, it's a nonprofit university. Will pay a tax penalty of $1,530,383 on golden parachute payments of $10.5 million. Future Form 990 filings by Liberty University will show whether or not an excess tax is paid on the parachute payments. Now, the list goes on and on and on. Chuck Pierce, a well-known among Pentecostal circles and so forth, and evangelical circles as a prophet. His Educational Media Foundation, Glory of Zion International, High Point University, Hillsdale College, which is a denominational school, very conservative and a great one, and all of these were hit with the excise tax. So there are many more. That's a part of the other side of money. Now, we only have a few minutes left. I want to give you some good news about money, because if you're like I am, it's very difficult for you to relate to somebody making $1 million a year, and they have a problem. We say, oh, too bad, because it doesn't affect us. We are, and most of the people watching me, I'm sure, are what we would call God's ordinary people, and that makes us very special because God loves us. Mm-hmm. God loves the ordinary. Oh my, how he loves the ordinary. He must, because there's so many of us. I mean, it is true. There's nothing wrong with being ordinary. Jesus loved the ordinary people. I've been studying the teachings of Jesus all over again. Here I am, 85 years old, and I'm going back in just absorbing. Even this morning, I was comparing all four Gospels. What did Jesus do that's reported by all four Gospel writers? And what did he say that was reported by all four? And this Sunday afternoon, I'll have the privilege of teaching a little group of people some of the things that Jesus taught. For instance, I'm going to teach them about him telling a man to not tell anybody. Mm-hmm. He said, he told him, don't you go tell anybody. We usually think that Jesus wants us to go and tell. No, sometimes he says, don't tell.
I know. Thing of it is, there's people, and I'm looking at myself, that I would tell just for something in me, and it was not good. I mean, it's not anything that's going to kill or hurt or anything. No, it was good that I kept my mouth shut.
Great point, Nancy. Measure your words. Be careful what you say. After they leave your mouth, you can't grab them and put them back.
I know, but see, the thing of it is, if you look at what you're thinking and how you're feeling, okay, are you going to tell somebody about something that's good just for your ego, I'll put it that way, or is it going to honor God? If it's for ego or you're not sure, you need to keep your mouth shut.
Well, here's the thing. We have to recognize that we are a flesh body.
Yep.
That has a flesh brain. Mm-hmm. But somehow within that brain we have a soul, which is a mind, a will, and emotions. If you fly off the handle, you have a sick soul. Mm-hmm. If you are careless about offending people, you have a sick soul. Mm-hmm. And there are times when people can walk around with a low-grade fever physically, and there are times when people walk around with a little bit of a sickness of the soul, something that's unresolved, and somebody says something and sets them off, and they say harsh things in return. I've been known to do it.
Oh, yeah.
What we used to call flying off the handle. Folks, there's no, we don't have to accept that as the norm.
No.
We can work on those things so that we do not offend people. Don't offend people. And don't be quickly offended. Don't take offense. After all, it won't make any difference 100 years from now for any of us. And that's a fact, and you know it. So let's measure our words, be careful not to offend people, and then let's not be quick and easily offended. All right? Mm-hmm. Jason, can I have about 2 more minutes here? Sure. Thank you. Here's what I wanted to get around to now that I've had my little sermonette in there about how we need to have some good public relations. One of these days we'll do an entire show on that. But here's my encouraging word about money. Back to money. And I know we've jumped here, but it's okay. This is the happy hour after all. Many years ago, back in the early 1990s, I was driving east on Cherry Street here in Springfield, Missouri. And I'm a guy that I listen to hear if God will say something to me. And sometimes he says something to me when I'm not listening. But he got my attention because I wasn't seeking an answer. But suddenly he spoke to me and said, I will teach you how to save. And I knew he meant money. And before I could respond, he said, I will teach you how to invest. And before I could respond, he said, then I'll teach you how to spend. And before I could respond, he said, then I'll teach you how to get. So later, Nancy, as you recall, I told you that God said he would teach me how to save, how to invest, how to spend, and how to get in that order. And you said, isn't that interesting? That's just the opposite of what the world teaches.
That's right.
So the world teaches you to get it and spend it. If there's any left, invest it, and don't worry about saving. Mm-hmm. That's why we have people who can't pay 1 month's bills because if they don't have an income. So God reversed that in my head. Immediately I put those principles to work. I found places to save. I found a way to invest. I became a great shopper and a lousy spender.
That's true.
There's things I just don't need.
That's right.
I don't have the car bug. I don't have a motorcycle bug. Looking at my friend Jason over here, he loves motorcycles. Bless his heart. I remember I had a Cushman motor scooter. Loved it. I'd like to have one again. But anyway, I'm a lousy spender, but I'm generous with other people. So
He is.
I have learned how to save, and I'm not a tightwad.
No.
I'm not a skinflint.
No.
I'm not as tight as the bark on the tree.
No.
I've just learned how to save.
Yeah.
I found out where the holes are in the dike. I could put my finger in there and stop it. Found out where the holes in my pockets were. Found out how money was slipping through my fingers. And then I learned how to invest. And then I learned how to spend. Really, I learned how not to spend. Mm-hmm. Now God has taught me how to get. And I am teaching this to other people. Remember that dollar bill? I put it someplace in here.
In the back.
It's the same dollar.
In the back.
In the back, yeah. Same dollar bill, paid everybody's bills, and ended up in the same place. Folks, you don't have to be a professional economist, and you don't have to be a victim of professional economists. You don't have to be a victim of anybody. Jesus said, make friends of mammon. Don't be an enemy. All right, we're run out of time. We're getting the notion. Here we go, folks. See you next Friday morning. Till then, stay blessed, okay?